I woke before the sun that morning, the kind of pale Portland gray that made everything feel quiet and a little suspended in time. The apartment was still the heat clicking softly in the vents, and for a moment I just sat on the edge of the bed, hands wrapped around my knees, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. December always did that to me, made old memories feel closer than they should. I reached for my phone without thinking, expecting the usual flood of holiday noise from the Grant Circle thread. My sister Melanie's dramatic wreath photos, my mother's reminders about menu labels, my father's instructions about arrival times. The inbox was empty. No group thread, no updates, not even a passive-aggressive reminder to bring dessert. I frowned and refreshed the screen. Nothing changed. Then my phone buzzed once, a single alert that cut straight through the quiet. A new message from Dad. Just one sentence. "You're not part of our Christmas this year." I stared at the words until they blurred, waiting for something else to follow, an explanation, maybe even a joke. Anything. Nothing came. No apology, no context, no conversation. Just a verdict. My breath thinned. My hands trembled, not with panic, but with something deeper, older, something that had been warning me for years. Instead of asking why or begging for clarity, I typed 2 words back. "No problem." Then I set the phone down, even as some instinct inside me whispered that this was only the beginning. I stood slowly and moved into the kitchen, the cold tile sending a jolt up my legs. My apartment had never felt so small or so quiet. I wrapped my hands around a mug and watched steam curl from the coffee I barely tasted. My father's message replayed itself again and again in the corner of my mind, each time carving a little deeper. For years, Christmas had been complicated but mandatory. Melanie's snide remarks, Mom's fragile smiles, Dad's sharp comments disguised as tradition. And every year I went. I showed up. I worked around their moods, their expectations, their shifting definition of family. But this was different. I walked back to the table, sat down, and reached for my phone again. No new messages, no follow-up. Just the cold simplicity of exclusion. I opened the Grant Circle thread out of habit. The last message was from 11 days ago, Melanie complaining about centerpiece colors. Since then, nothing. They hadn't forgotten Christmas. They had forgotten me. My finger hovered above the screen, ready to close the app, when another notification slid across the top. A friendly reminder from the Redwood Bay Mortgage Center. The upcoming payment of $2,900 was scheduled to process in 3 days. My heart thudded once painfully. The house I didn't live in. The house I didn't own. The house I had been paying for quietly, obediently for 4 years. I set the mug down with a sharp clink. My pulse picked up as I reached for my laptop. Maybe this was a coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking because of the text. Maybe I knew I wasn't. The laptop hummed awake, and my banking dashboard appeared, rows of blue and white numbers, the familiar list of withdrawals. Mortgage, gas, electric, internet, water, property tax escrow, every single one set to auto-pay, every single one tied to the Redwood Bay house, and every single one pulled from my account, not theirs. My breath went shallow. A wave of heat rose up my spine, the kind that comes when your brain finally catches up to something your body has sensed for years. I clicked into the mortgage tab and scrolled through the payment history. Month after month after month, my income covering a home where I wasn't welcome. A memory surfaced sharp as a blade. Last Christmas. I'd arrived late after a brutal week at work. Dad had stood in the living room, arms crossed, and announced to everyone, "Nice of you to finally care enough to show up." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was cruel. Melanie smirked. Mom pretended not to hear. I had swallowed the humiliation like always and helped serve dinner. My jaw clenched now. That girl, the one who absorbed everything in silence, was still somewhere inside me, but she was waking up. A shiver moved through me as I stared at the screen. Dad tells me I'm not part of Christmas this year, and 3 days later I'm supposed to pay for the roof over their heads, for their comfort, for traditions. I'm apparently too inconvenient for. I closed my eyes and let the truth settle slow and heavy. They didn't forget me. They didn't make a mistake. They made a decision. They excluded me while still expecting me to fund their lives. A flicker of anger, small but bright, ignited in my chest. Not rage clarity. I reopened my banking app this time with a steadiness I didn't feel an hour ago. Something was changing, in me, around me, and when the change was done, nothing in Redwood Bay would look the same again. I sat at the kitchen table long after the coffee had gone cold, staring at the mortgage notification like it had materialized from another dimension. $2,900. 3 days. My name attached to a house I was no longer welcome to step inside. The number pulsed on the screen like something alive, something that had always been there waiting for me to finally look it in the eye. I opened the banking app again, this time intentionally. Not sleepily, not automatically, not with the detached acceptance I'd carried for 4 years. My hands hovered over the screen for a breath before I tapped into the account that had become a silent artery feeding Redwood Bay. The dashboard loaded. Mortgage, gas, electric, water, internet, heating, property tax escrow. Every single one labeled with the same status, auto pay active. There was no reason my heart should twist the way it did. It wasn't new information. I had known. Somewhere deep down I had always known. But the difference now was what sat beside that knowledge, my father's message. The finality of it. The dismissal. The way he had typed it, as if I were an outsider he barely tolerated, rather than the daughter who had kept their house running for years. I clicked into the mortgage history. Lines of payments scrolled down the screen, each one stamped with my name, my account, my income, month after month, year after year. I scrolled back to the beginning and found the first payment made 4 years ago in January. That month felt like a lifetime ago. My mind pulled me back to the day it began. Dad sitting at my tiny Portland kitchen table with a stack of papers spread out like some benevolent request. He talked about family, about opportunity, about how he and Mom needed just a little help after his hours were reduced at work. He had laughed and said my new salary made me the smart one, the capable one. He wanted me to co-sign the mortgage so they could get a better interest rate. Temporary, he had promised, just until things stabilize. And I believed him. Now I thumbed through the PDF of the loan documents I hadn't opened since signing them. The ownership section was exactly as I feared. Charles and Regina Grant listed as sole owners. My name appeared lower down, co-borrower, nothing more. No rights, no equity, no legal claim, just a source of credit. A financial backbone. A knot tightened behind my ribs. Back then, I was young enough and hopeful enough to think helping my parents would bring us closer. That they would appreciate me. That loyalty meant belonging. I switched over to my personal finance spreadsheet. It had been my budgeting lifeline in my 20s, a habit I kept even after my income grew. I scrolled past groceries and rent and student loan payments until I reached the section marked Family. My own handwriting glared back at me. Neat rows of amounts, dates, notes about repairs I paid for, monthly utilities, winter heating surges, the water heater replacement last spring. The new fence Melanie bragged about to her friends as if she had chosen it and paid for it herself. I added the totals in my head, then gave up halfway through. The number was already staggering. A part of me ached not just from betrayal, but from embarrassment. How had I not seen the pattern sooner? How had every quiet request become normal? How had every bill shifted from temporary help to expectation without a single conversation? How had I handed them access to my income like it was the most natural thing in the world, because that's how it had always worked? Dad made decisions. Mom smoothed them over. Melanie benefited. and I absorbed the cost, emotional or otherwise. I closed the spreadsheet and sat back, letting the truth settle into the cracks of my chest. Nothing about this was accidental. My role in the family had been assigned a long time ago. I was the reliable one, the problem solver, the workhorse, the person who said yes when everyone else said nothing. And when I stopped fitting their needs, they cut me out without hesitation. My eyes drifted back to the mortgage tab. Autopay scheduled for 3 days from now. It should have scared me. It should have made me panic. But the longer I stared at the number, the steadier something inside me became. For the first time, I wondered, not with guilt, but with clarity, why I should keep paying for a family who didn't want me. I tapped the message thread with Dad, scrolling past old instructions, demands, and reminders. The tone of every message suddenly felt sharper, clearer. Not fatherly, managerial, transactional. When he told me I owed them, he didn't mean emotionally. He meant literally. I set the phone down and breathed in slowly, letting the cold air of the apartment settle around me. Something in me was shifting, reassembling, waking up. The kind of awakening that doesn't announce itself loudly but rises like a tide. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the drizzle coating the street below. For years, I'd convinced myself that peace meant compliance, that family meant sacrifice, that love meant giving without asking for anything back. But maybe peace meant truth. Maybe family meant respect. Maybe love, real love, didn't demand you bankrupt yourself emotionally or financially. The thought settled in my mind with surprising ease. I walked back to the table, opened the laptop again, and hovered my finger above the banking app. Not to cancel anything yet, not to act out of anger, but to finally ask myself the question I should have asked years ago. Why am I paying for people who don't want me? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew I was finally ready to find it. I stood there with my finger hovering above the autopay settings, the screen glowing softly in the dim light of my apartment. I hadn't intended to make any decisions yet. I just wanted to understand the truth, my truth, without the foggy excuses I'd let settle in my mind for years. But the longer I stared at the number, the more it felt like a question aimed directly at me. A question I had avoided, dodged, minimized. And now, it demanded an answer. Before I could think too much, my phone buzzed against the table, startling me. A new notification from a name I rarely saw anymore, my cousin Bree. The preview read only 3 words. We need to talk. Something sharp fluttered in my chest. Bree was quiet, observant, never dramatic. When she reached out, it meant something had shifted. I opened the message. She asked if I was home. I typed back yes. Her reply came instantly. Can I call? I stared at the screen for a moment before hitting accept. Her voice came through, breathless, anxious. Ava, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but you need to know what they're doing. Her words tumbled out in a hurry, something she never did normally. There's a group chat, not the Grant Circle, a different one. Dad's in it. So is Melanie. A few of your parents' friends. They've been talking about you. My pulse thudded once behind my ribs. Talking about what? She hesitated. About how you're useful. About how your job pays well so you can handle the grown-up costs. Your dad said something like, as long as you keep the money flowing, he can tolerate your attitude. Melanie joked that at least someone in the family earns their keep. For a moment, everything inside me went completely still. No anger, no pain, just an eerie, hollow clarity. Do you have screenshots? I asked quietly. She did. Within seconds, they were flooding into my phone one after another. Screenshots of my dad bragging about hosting Christmas because he'd worked hard enough to deserve it. Screenshots of Melanie calling me dramatic and emotional. Screenshots of them discussing the holiday menu, the decorations, the backyard tent rental. All with the assumption that I would pay for everything without being asked, thanked, or even consulted. Then the worst one. Melanie. Just make sure she covers the catering deposit. Dad said she promised. Dad. Send her the bill. She won't say no. My breath caught. I had never promised anything, not a single thing. A sharp ache pushed up my throat, not quite tears, not quite rage, but the painful recognition of a truth I had buried deep. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't miscommunication or holiday stress or family tension. This was exploitation disguised as tradition. This was manipulation wrapped in expectations I'd been conditioned to accept since childhood. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Because, Bree whispered, because I can't watch them use you like this anymore. And because they're planning something else. My grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean something else? You need to check the neighborhood Facebook group. Your dad posted something this morning. It's already getting attention. My stomach tightened. What kind of attention? Just check, she murmured. I'm sorry, Ava. I really am. When the call ended, the apartment felt heavier, the walls more narrow. I moved slowly to the sofa, sat down and opened Facebook. I typed the name of the Redwood Bay neighborhood page into the search bar and waited for it to load. There it was, a post from my father. A photo of the Redwood Bay house glowing with lights and a caption beneath it that made me freeze. So proud to finally host a real community Christmas this year. Years of sacrifice and hard work have allowed us to open our home and give back. Years of sacrifice. His sacrifice. I scrolled. Comment after comment praised him. You're such a generous family. Charles, you've always taken care of your own. You must be so proud of all you've built. Proud of what he built. What he built. The room tilted slightly as I leaned back, the phone still warm in my hand. My breaths came slower now, deeper. Something old and brittle inside me cracked, not in pain, but in release. The truth was out. I had proof. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I had been used. The pressure in my chest started to ease as a new kind of clarity settled over me, quiet but strong, unlike anything I'd felt before. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop again. This time I wasn't trembling. This time my hands were steady. I created a folder on my desktop. I named it one word: evidence. Then I began dragging every screenshot, statement, invoice, and document into it. Each soft click of the mouse felt like another stitch being pulled from the old narrative I had carried for decades. The narrative that said I should endure, comply, provide, apologize, shrink. As the folder filled, something inside me expanded. If they had drawn a line by excluding me from Christmas, then I would draw one too, and mine would be sharper, clearer, unmistakable. Whatever happened next, I wasn't going to be the quiet one anymore. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out, my mind replaying every screenshot, every message, every moment I'd brushed aside as family stuff. By the time the gray morning light crept through my blinds, I felt hollowed out and strangely alert, like something inside me had shifted into place while I wasn't looking. I wrapped myself in a sweater and walked into the kitchen. The apartment felt cold, but not from the temperature. It was the kind of cold that came when you saw the truth clearly for the first time and couldn't unsee it. I made coffee mechanically, watching the dark liquid fill the mug like it might steady me. It didn't. I sat at my table and opened my laptop again. The evidence folder glowed on the desktop like a tiny door I had built into a different life. I clicked it open. Mortgage statements, utility bills, heating repairs, fence installation, water heater replacement, screenshots from Bree, Facebook posts, Reddit Bay neighborhood comments praising my parents. All of it sat there, undeniable and sharp. I took a slow breath and opened the spreadsheet I had been updating the night before. I added line after line, documenting every payment I'd made for them, every dollar that had flowed out of my account and into a house where I wasn't welcome. When I reached the end of the list, I stared at the rough total. It wasn't just a number. It was proof of a lifetime's worth of conditioning. Proof of the role I'd unknowingly stepped into. Proof that I had become the financial foundation of a family that didn't even want me at Christmas dinner. Something inside me hardened, not into anger exactly, but into clarity. I clicked out of the spreadsheet and into the texts from my father. The most recent ones hovered at the top of the thread. Need you to send $7,500 for the catering. Melanie will send the invoice. Don't be late. Not a question, not a request, a command. I scrolled upward, reading through older messages. Every line felt like a script I had been expected to follow without deviation. When he needed something, he told me. When I achieved something, he dismissed it. When I hesitated, he called it emotional. When I complied, it was expected. When I didn't, it was a problem. A heaviness settled in my chest, but beneath it something cooler and steadier waited. The question returned loud and unignorable. Why am I paying for people who don't want me around? I closed the text thread and forced myself to stand. I needed air. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside, letting the moist winter chill hit my face. The elevator ride down felt longer than usual, giving me too much time to think. When the doors opened onto the lobby, I walked outside and stood near the small patch of grass beside the parking lot. Cars rushed by on the street. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Life moved on, indifferent to my unraveling. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to not carry this invisible burden, to not be the constant provider, to not be the responsible one, to not be the Grant who cleaned up quietly behind the scenes. I wondered who I might have become if I hadn't spent years trying to earn a place in a family that only valued the weight I could carry. I hugged my coat tighter around myself and went back upstairs. When I reached my apartment, my phone buzzed on the counter. Another message from Dad. I didn't open it. Instead, I went to the small desk in the corner and pulled out a stack of mail I hadn't touched in a week. Right on top was another physical copy of the mortgage notice. Even though I'd gone paperless years ago, they always sent a hard copy. The letter inside showed the same amount, $2,900 due in 3 days. I laid the letter flat on the desk and stared at it until the numbers wavered slightly. Then my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Melanie. Since you're not coming, make sure you handle the deposit today. Dad said you promised. Promised. That word hit me like a nail driven into wood. I had promised nothing. I had agreed to nothing. They'd made a plan, assigned me the cost, and assumed I would fall in line. My fingers hovered over the reply box. I typed, "When did I ever promise that I read it twice?" 3 times. Then I deleted it. I didn't owe her or any of them a justification. Instead, I turned off my phone entirely and walked to the window. Outside, a low silver sky hung over the city. The street lamps were still on, glowing faintly against the cold. My breath fogged the glass as I stared out at the world that kept moving, kept breathing, kept existing without the gravitational pull of my father's expectations. I returned to the desk, pulled my laptop closer, and opened a blank document. My fingers hesitated for only a second before I began typing a detailed summary of everything I had uncovered about the house, the payments, the manipulation. Not for them. Not for a lawyer. Not for any public fight. For me. To see it. To acknowledge it. To stop minimizing it. The more I typed, the steadier I felt. The facts were plain. Unavoidable. Heavy, yes, but also liberating in their honesty. By the time I stopped, my breath had slowed. My shoulders no longer hovered near my ears. The truth was spread across the screen in black and white, finally visible beyond the haze of guilt and obligation. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time in my life, the thought of saying no didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like oxygen. And I wondered with a kind of quiet dread and quiet power what would happen if I truly stopped. Stopped paying. Stopped complying. Stopped letting them decide what I owed. Then, as if summoned by the shift inside me, there was a knock at my apartment door. Soft, hesitant, familiar. A voice followed. My mother's voice. Quiet, uncertain. "Ava, honey, it's Mom." "Can we talk?" I froze with my hand still on the doorknob, the sound of my mother's voice leaking through the wood like something from another lifetime. She hadn't been to my apartment in years. She always let Dad speak for both of them, always stayed half hidden in the background offering banana bread instead of apologies, silence instead of intervention. Hearing her standing outside my door made something tight coil in my chest. I pulled the door open slowly. There she was, Regina Grant, wrapped in a long wool coat, hair pinned back the way she always did when she wanted to look calm, harmless, diplomatic. She held a reusable grocery bag in one hand like she needed a prop to justify her presence. Her eyes flicked over my face, searching for an expression she could work with. "Hi, honey," she whispered. "Can I come in for a second?" I stepped back, wordless. She moved past me and set the grocery bag on the counter. The smell of banana bread, warm, familiar, painfully nostalgic, floated up. I didn't reach for it. Mom clasped her hands together, the old signal she used whenever she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in soft language. I thought I'd stop by since things got complicated. That word hit me like a cold wind. Complicated. That was the word she used when Dad yelled at me for getting into a college he said was too far. Complicated when he refused to attend my graduation. Complicated when he made me cry in the garage because I showed up 10 minutes late to Christmas dinner last year. She always reduced his harm to something small enough to swallow. She took a breath. "Your father mentioned you were upset." I let out a small, humorless laugh. "He told me I'm not welcome at Christmas. There's not really another way to phrase that." Mom winced as if the sentence physically hurt her. He didn't mean it like that. He gets stressed. Holidays are a lot." "Did you know about the vote?" I asked quietly. Her entire expression cracked. "Vote? What vote? The one where everyone agreed I shouldn't be there." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then something flickered, panic, guilt, recognition. "I wasn't part of that," she whispered. "Your father said some things were better decided without dragging everyone into discomfort." "So he told you after I said." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She tried again. "I really came because your father said you were confused about the catering deposit." I stared at her, feeling heat crawl up my spine. "Confused?" She rushed to explain. "Heather said she sent you the total. Your father thought maybe you could handle the deposit like you always do. Just until the holiday is over." "Just until the holiday is over," I repeated quietly. She nodded, relieved that I hadn't raised my voice. "You've always been so capable. And your father has so much on his shoulders. He said it would help keep the peace if I'm not paying it." Mom blinked hard. "Honey, please think about what that means. I already have." Her gaze drifted toward the stack of mail on my desk, the mortgage letter sitting right on top. Her eyes tightened as she took in the name on the envelope. My name. "Your dad said the house was a burden," she murmured. "He said you offered to help. We thought you understood." "I offered short-term help," I said slowly, "not to fund their entire life in Redwood Bay. Not to pay every bill for 4 years. Not to carry a mortgage for a house I'm not even welcome in." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Your father isn't good with money. He never has been. He leans on you because he trusts you. Because you're the strong one." I stared at her, stunned by how easily she rebranded manipulation as trust. Trust. He told the family I'm not coming. Then told me to pay for everything anyway. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall. "I don't want the family divided," she whispered. "If you refuse the deposit, he'll explode. I can't take another holiday like last year, and Heather is so anxious and—" "There it is," I said softly. "You want me to keep the peace." She swallowed. "I just want things to stay normal." Normal. My voice cracked, not loud but sharp with truth. Normal is me paying for everything so you all can pretend Dad built the life you show off online. Normal is me being useful when you need money, but invisible when you want a perfect family photo. Normal is keeping quiet so he doesn't throw a tantrum. She didn't deny it. Mom, I said slowly, did you come because you care? Or because he told you to talk me into paying? Her face folded for a moment before she straightened. I came because I don't want him angry. There it was, the truth. Then go home, I whispered. Tell him I'm not paying. Not the catering, not the mortgage, not the water, gas, electricity insurance, not another cent. Her lips parted in disbelief. If you stop the payments, the house will go dark. Her voice shook. Your father will blame me. Maybe he should. She froze, absorbing that. Then her shoulders dropped a small, defeated surrender. She reached for the banana bread bag as if carbs could fix decades of silence. Please, she whispered one last time, just talk to him before you make any decisions. There's nothing to talk about, I said. He made his decision. Now I'm making mine. She nodded barely. Then she walked to the door, opened it, and slipped through without looking back. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood still for a long moment, breathing through the quiet, feeling a strange mix of grief and liberation. Then I turned to my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked into the autopay settings. My hand hovered for only a second this time. I canceled the mortgage, the gas, the electric, the water, the internet. All of it. One by one, each confirmation chime sounded like a lock sliding into place. And as the final cancellation went through, my phone lit up on the counter, my father calling. I didn't answer my father's call. I watched his name flash against the screen until it faded, leaving only the dim reflection of my apartment lights. My hand trembled not with regret, but with the adrenaline of doing something I had never done before in my life. I had said no. Not out loud, but decisively, irrevocably. And now the consequences were rolling toward me like a wave I could finally see coming. The phone buzzed again. I turned it face down. I grabbed my keys before I could talk myself out of it. If I stayed in that apartment 1 minute longer, I would lose my nerve. I needed to look him in the eye, not for closure, not for reconciliation, but for the truth. The truth I had been swallowing since childhood. The truth I had ignored until it grew into a mortgage-sized monster in my bank records. The December air slapped me as soon as I stepped outside. Cold, clear, sharp. The kind of cold that stripped away excuses. I drove toward Redwood Bay with both hands gripping the steering wheel. The highway was almost empty, a long stretch of gray cutting through winter fog. My thoughts felt strangely ordered, like boxes finally arranged on the correct shelves. Every few minutes, my phone buzzed again with new notifications. Voicemails from Dad, texts from Mom, messages from Melanie. I didn't look at any of them. The closer I got to Redwood Bay, the heavier the sky seemed to hang. When I turned into my parents' neighborhood, the houses glowed with Christmas lights, warm and curated, everything looking exactly the way small-town people loved to brag about online. And there, in the middle of the street, sat the Grant house. Blue siding, garland wrapped around the porch railings, a giant wreath on the door. Exactly the kind of house Dad liked to brag about. Exactly the kind I had been paying for. I parked at the curb and sat there for a full minute. My heart thudded once slow and heavy before settling into a calmer rhythm. I wasn't 13 anymore. I wasn't the girl begging for approval. I wasn't the adult daughter trying to earn a seat at their table. I was the woman paying the bills. I stepped out of the car and walked up the front path. Before I could knock, the door swung open. My father filled the doorway wearing his faded flannel shirt, the one he always put on when he wanted to appear casual, approachable, the everyman hero of the neighborhood. His eyes widened for a moment, surprise flashing quickly across them before dissolving into something colder. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, voice flat, controlled. I kept my expression neutral. "We need to talk." He leaned against the frame blocking the entrance like a bouncer turning away a stranger. "If this is about Christmas, Ava, the decision has been made. Everyone agreed. We want a peaceful holiday. There it was again. That word. Peaceful. Their version of peace always meant my silence. I stepped closer. I'm not here for Christmas. I'm here to talk about the house. His jaw tightened. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for me. Enough for someone who had grown up reading his smallest shifts like weather patterns. He tried to wave me off. Everything is under control. No, I said quietly. It isn't. He bristled. Watch your tone. A calm settled over me. No. You watch yours. Footsteps echoed behind him. Melanie appeared in the hallway, arms crossed, wearing her usual expression of martyrdom mixed with entitlement. If you're here to start drama, she said, you can leave. You're not ruining this for us. Us. Interesting choice of words. I shifted my gaze back to Dad. Have you told them the truth, I asked? Or are you still pretending you're the one keeping this house running? His face reddened. I don't know what your cousin told you, but I wasn't talking about Bree. My voice was calm, even lethal. I'm talking about the mortgage, the utilities, the gas, water, electricity, the repairs, the new fence, the heating system. Tell them who pays for it. Melanie stared at me, eyes narrowing. Dad pays the bills. Everyone knows that. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and held up the folder labeled Reality. Do you want to see the statements? Or should I just send them to you? Dad stepped forward, voice dropping into the same low threat he used when I was a teenager. You're acting ungrateful. Ungrateful. The word hit me like a cold slap, but not the way he expected. It didn't make me small. It didn't make me ashamed. It made me see the entire structure of our family dynamic with blinding clarity. You have never paid a single dollar into this house, I said. Not one. I've paid every mortgage payment for 4 years. Every utility bill. Every repair. Every emergency. Everything. Melanie scoffed. You're lying. I looked at her calmly. And yet here you all are, telling the neighborhood how generous you are, how much you've sacrificed, all while sending invoices to me. Dad's voice cracked. You wouldn't dare say that outside this house. I didn't blink. I already did. A flicker of panic crossed his face. It was small, but it was real. I stepped back. This ends today. What ends? Melanie snapped. Every auto-pay tied to this house, I said. The mortgage, the gas, the electricity, the water, the internet, the insurance. All of it. You're responsible for your own home starting now. Dad's face flushed with rage. You can't do that. I already did. For a moment the porch was silent. So silent I could hear the faint hum of the neighbor's Christmas projector spinning next door. I turned and started down the steps. They didn't follow. They didn't speak. They only stared, stunned, as if the ground beneath them had shifted. At the bottom of the path, my phone buzzed again. A new message. From Bree. You need to see something. Check Facebook when you leave. I got into my car, closed the door, and let the engine hum through my bones. Whatever was waiting for me online, I already knew one thing. The truth had finally stopped being silent. I left their driveway without looking back, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The lights from the Grant house glowed in my rearview mirror like a staged performance, warm, inviting, completely fraudulent. My father's voice still echoed in my head, sharp and cold, while Melanie's smug expression replayed like a loop I couldn't shut off. But beneath all of it was something steadier, something fierce. I had finally said the truth out loud, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would be the same. Halfway down Redwood Bay Road, my phone buzzed again in the passenger seat. I glanced at the screen at a red light. It was the message from Bree I hadn't opened yet. You need to see something. Check Facebook. The light turned green. I drove another mile before I pulled into a nearly empty grocery store lot, the kind with a flickering street lamp and a single car abandoned near the carts. My heart thudded as I opened Facebook, typing the name of the Redwood Bay neighborhood group into the search bar. The page loaded, and there it was. A massive photo of my parents' living room appeared at the top of the feed. The same room I grew up in, but now transformed into some kind of holiday event showcase. A towering Christmas tree covered in gold and red ornaments. Matching garland draped around the fireplace. Perfectly arranged dining tables with cloth napkins, actual name cards, and centerpieces I definitely hadn't seen before. My father stood in the middle of the photo arm around my mother, both of them smiling with the practiced warmth of people expecting applause. The caption beneath the photo made my stomach flip. So proud to finally host a real community Christmas this year. Years of hard work have allowed us to open our home and give back to Redwood Bay. Grateful for every sacrifice that made this possible. Every sacrifice. His sacrifice. I scrolled. The comments were pouring in like confetti. You and Regina are incredible. This community is lucky to have you. Charles, you've always gone above and beyond. What a generous family. My hand tightened on the phone until my fingers went numb. Every glowing compliment felt like a slap. I had paid for the mortgage. I had paid for the utilities. I had paid for the repairs. I had paid for the backyard renovations that made this event possible. I had funded every piece of the image he was now parading around as his noble generosity. Then I saw the comment that stole my breath. Sad your daughter couldn't make it. I heard she always flakes on family events. Melanie had liked the comment. I exhaled slowly, a cold calm spreading through me. They weren't just excluding me, they were rewriting the story. They were painting me as the neglectful daughter while standing in a house built on my income. A notification bubble blinked at the top of the screen. Bree had sent another message. This one included a screenshot. Thought you should see this too, her text said. The screenshot was from the Redwood Bay Community Newsletter's Facebook page, a teaser for their January edition. A local family opens their home for holiday, giving the headline read, featuring Charles and Regina Grant. Below the text was a photo of the table setup, the same one I had just seen. The teaser mentioned that the Grants had funded everything from their own savings. A wave of heat surged through my spine. Savings. He hadn't paid a single bill in years. Not one. I scrolled again, my thumb almost mechanical. Another post popped up, this one from the catering company. A cheerful announcement. Excited to serve the Grant family holiday event. Thank you for your deposit. Ava Grant. I nearly choked. They tagged me publicly. They credited me for paying the deposit he told the neighborhood he funded. My lungs felt tight. The cold air in my car was suddenly too thin. They were using me, using my income, using my silence, using my name when it was convenient, then erasing me when it wasn't. And the most infuriating part. They all thought I would never fight back, that I would keep paying, that I would stay quiet. I shut my eyes and leaned back against the headrest. A heavy ache settled behind my chest, not just hurt, not just anger, but a deep, bone-level exhaustion. I thought of every holiday I'd attended with a smile while my father mocked me. Every snide remark Melanie made, every apology I forced out, every bill I covered, every boundary I swallowed. And suddenly something inside me shifted. Slow, steady, unshakable. I opened my eyes and inhaled deeply. The truth was finally visible. Not the story my father told, not the version Melanie parroted, not the narrative my mother clung to. My truth. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being dramatic, difficult, or emotional. I had been exploited. Financially, emotionally, systematically, and publicly. I picked up my phone again, my hand steadier this time, and typed a message to Bree. Thanks for telling me. I'm done being quiet. She responded almost immediately. I figured you would be. But Ava, there's one more thing. Someone else posted about your parents too. Check your tags. My heart kicked once in my chest. I switched tabs. A coworker, someone from another department at work, someone I barely knew, had tagged me in a link to a local newspaper preview. "Is this your parents' place? Thought you might want to see." I opened it. A headline appeared. "Retired Couple Funds. Christmas for Families in Need. A heartwarming Redwood Bay story. Retired couple. Funds Christmas." Heartwarming. For a long moment, I didn't breathe. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This wasn't private. My father wasn't just stealing credit. He was leveraging my money to build a reputation in the community, a reputation based on lies. A slow, steady conviction unfurled in me like a flame catching after years of being smothered. He wanted to tell a story. Fine. Now he would hear mine. I started the car, turned onto the road back toward Portland, and let the cold wind whip against the windows as I drove. The night felt endless around me, but inside, something was burning bright. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be the one hiding anymore. The drive back to Portland felt shorter this time, as if my mind were racing ahead of the car. The engine hummed steadily, but inside my chest everything pulsed with a tight, focused clarity. I kept replaying the Facebook posts, the neighborhood, praise the catering company tag, the newsletter teaser, each one a fresh reminder of how deeply my father had rewritten the truth. By the time I pulled into the dim garage beneath my apartment building, my hands were stiff on the steering wheel. I turned off the engine but didn't move. The silence inside the car felt thick, buzzing with everything I hadn't had the chance to feel at the Grant house. My phone buzzed once more in the cup holder. I ignored it. I needed one breath, one moment to steady myself before letting the next wave hit. Eventually, I forced myself to grab the phone and head upstairs. My apartment greeted me with the same soft stillness it always had, but tonight it felt different, like the only place left that belonged to me. I dropped my keys on the counter and sat on the couch, pulling my laptop onto my lap. The evidence folder opened with a small click. Everything I'd collected stared back at me: mortgage history, utilities bills, repairs, screenshots, neighborhood posts. Proof that the narrative my father had sold the community was built entirely on my back. My inbox flashed with a new email. Not from Bree, not from Melanie, from someone I didn't recognize. A journalist, local Redwood Bay Chronicle. The subject line read, "Questions regarding the Grant holiday event." My stomach tightened as I clicked. She introduced herself, said she had received anonymous documents related to the Grant property and the financial responsibility behind it. She was preparing a follow-up to the community feature and wanted to verify a few things. Her questions were blunt. Was I the financial contributor behind the mortgage? Did I pay the utilities? Was my name on the deed? Had I been involved in planning the event or invited? And finally, if you choose to respond, I will protect your anonymity. I leaned back slowly, feeling the air thin around me. Someone had sent her the documents. Someone had backed me. Not my parents, not Melanie, not anyone in that house, but someone. I stood up, pacing across the room, the floor creaking softly beneath my steps. The old voice in me, the one shaped by years of "don't make waves, don't upset your father, just let it go," whispered that I should ignore the email, that responding would make things worse. But another voice, louder this time, steadier and more certain, reminded me of the screenshot where my father told strangers he'd paid for everything. Reminded me of the bills I'd covered while he bragged about sacrifice. Reminded me of the text telling me I wasn't welcome at Christmas. I sat down and placed my fingers on the keys. My reply was simple, honest, measured, free of accusation or theatrics. I confirmed I had paid every mortgage installment, every utility bill, every major repair. I explained that my name was not on the deed. I stated I was excluded from the Christmas event. I asked to remain anonymous and thanked her for reaching out. Before I could overthink, I attached several documents, nothing excessive, just enough to confirm the truth, and hit send. A strange quiet descended over the room afterward. My heart thudded, but not in fear. It felt more like the moment after you open a window in a stale room and fresh air rushes in. I stood and walked to the window. Outside, the street lamps cast soft halos on wet pavement. A woman walked her dog beneath the glow. A couple carried groceries inside. Ordinary life moved on around me, unaffected by the storm brewing in Redwood Bay. My phone vibrated again. A message from my father. I didn't open it. The preview line was enough. "We need to talk, now." Then another. "Fix this." And another. "You're making a mistake." His desperation bled through the screen. I turned the phone over face down on the table. My gaze drifted back to the evidence folder still open on my laptop. I clicked around instinctively, organizing files into new subfolders. Mortgage, utilities, conversations, community, public image. Each folder felt like another boundary, forming another piece of truth collected and sorted, and finally acknowledged. My stomach twisted once as I thought of the little girl I used to be, the one who learned early to stay quiet to keep the peace. She had done everything right. She had worked hard, earned a career, taken care of everyone, and still ended up as the one disposable enough to exclude at Christmas. I reached for the stack of papers on my desk and picked up the physical mortgage notice again. The number stared up at me, $2,900, and for once, it didn't swallow me whole. For once, I wasn't the one drowning beneath it. They were. I set it down gently. Another vibration shook the table. A voicemail this time. I didn't need to hear it to know what was inside: rage, blame, manipulation, maybe the occasional guilt-laced plea. I'd heard the same tone in different shapes for most of my life. But something was different tonight. I wasn't afraid of it. Instead, I opened my laptop again and saved a copy of the reporter's email thread into the evidence folder. It felt like placing the final puzzle piece into a picture I'd been pretending not to see. When I finally turned off the lights and sat in the glow of the street outside, my mind felt quiet for the first time in days. I didn't know exactly what would happen tomorrow, but I knew this much. I wasn't going back to silence. The next morning I woke to light slipping through the blinds in thin, pale stripes. My phone lay on the nightstand, still face down, still silent. For a moment, I let myself pretend the world outside was calm, untouched, unbothered by the unraveling of the last 24 hours. But when I reached for the phone and flipped it over, reality hit like icy water. 11 missed calls, 8 messages, 4 voicemails, all from one name. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I went to make coffee, letting the warmth settle into my hands before I picked the phone up again. A new email sat at the top of my inbox. The subject line made my heartbeat stutter. Legal consultation. My father had forwarded me an email chain. Not to include me, not to apologize, not to ask for context, but to intimidate me. I opened it. His original email to a local attorney in Redwood Bay was long, frantic, and dripping with half-truths. He called me unstable, vindictive, and claimed I had sabotaged the family home out of spite. He said I had shut off the mortgage and utilities without warning and asked whether he could sue me for damages to his reputation. I scrolled down to the attorney's reply with a tight breath. The response was short, clinical, and devastating for him. If Ms. Grant is listed on the mortgage and utility accounts as the primary payer, she maintains every legal right to cancel voluntary payments. Any misrepresentation of who is financially responsible would be a separate issue that does not involve her. My professional recommendation is that you resolve this privately. I read that line 3 times. Resolve this privately. Not demand more from me. Not accuse me in public. Not threaten lawsuits. Resolve. My father had accidentally handed me validation stamped with legal authority. A strange relief rippled through me, followed by something steadier, confidence maybe, or simply the absence of guilt. I forwarded the chain to myself and dropped it into the evidence folder. A few minutes later, while I was buttering toast, I didn't feel hungry for my phone vibrated again. This time it was a call from David, a senior engineer at work who usually kept to himself. Ava. Hey, I hope this isn't a bad time. I saw the newspaper teaser floating around online. That's your parents' house, right? My breath caught. Unfortunately. He was quiet for a beat. If you need legal context for anything, I know someone who handles property contracts. Something inside me released just a little. Someone was offering help without wanting something in return. I told him a brief version, only what I was comfortable sharing. He listened carefully, then asked, "Is your name on the deed?" "No." "And the accounts all mine." There was a long exhale on the line. "Then legally, Ava. The risk has been yours the whole time, but so is the power." The power. No one had ever used that word about me in relation to my family. He went on explaining how co-borrower responsibility worked, what my father's misrepresentation might mean, and why no attorney would take his case. When we hung up, I stood there in my quiet kitchen, gripping the phone and letting every word sink in. Power, mine. Around noon, Bree texted again. "You need an update. Things got ugly." I braced myself. She wrote that the holiday event had collapsed after the lights went out at the house. Guests whispered. Neighbors asked pointed questions. One neighbor's brother worked for an energy company and immediately doubted Dad's excuses about billing errors. The story isn't holding, Bree wrote. People are talking. A lot. A small spark flickered in my chest. Not joy, not triumph, but something like relief. The narrative he'd crafted for years was cracking. Then another message from her arrived. "He's blaming you in the family chat. Says you're unstable and emotional." But honestly, people aren't buying it. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. For so long, my father's version of me had shaped how I saw myself. Now, it was being peeled apart in front of witnesses. My phone buzzed again, this time with angry sputtering from the family group, Melanie. "You made us look ridiculous. Everyone was talking about the power outage. Mom, Ava, your father is humiliated. You should have waited. Dad, you will fix this." I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and added new evidence to the folder: screenshots of my father's accusations, the email from the attorney, Bree's messages. Each file felt like another thread untangling from the old family script. My father texted again minutes later. "You have one chance to make this right." Then another. "You're being dramatic. Then this family will cut you out permanently if you keep this up." I stared at the screen, and for the first time ever, the threat didn't land. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood I had been cut out long before I stopped paying the bills. The only difference now was that I could see it clearly. I set the phone down and let the silence settle around me. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't frightening. It wasn't punishment. It was clarity. It was freedom. And as the screen dimmed, I whispered to myself, not shaky, not scared, but steady. I don't owe you anything anymore. The email from the Redwood Bay Mortgage Center sat at the top of my inbox like a small, glowing warning. I read it twice before the words truly landed. They were requesting a co-borrower appointment to review the account. The language was formal, stiff, and unmistakably serious. A sentence near the bottom tightened something in my chest. Failure to respond may affect all co-borrowers. I set the phone down. The quiet in my apartment felt sharper than usual, like the air itself was waiting for me to make a decision. For years, I had ignored these notices without thinking they were routine, automatic background noise. Now, the system had finally realized there was a human on the other end of those monthly drafts. I walked to my desk, pulled out the binder I had begun the night before, and started organizing the documents inside. Mortgage statements, utility bills, repair invoices, screenshots of texts, screenshots of the Grant Inner Circle group chat, screenshots of my father's Facebook post, the neighborhood newsletter teaser, the catering company's tag. I slid each one into a clear sleeve. With every page, the binder grew heavier, but my hands grew steadier. When I finished, I booked the appointment. Tomorrow, in person. The next morning, I drove to Redwood Bay with the binder in the passenger seat like a witness. The sky was low and heavy with winter clouds. When I pulled into the bank's parking lot, the building's glass exterior reflected the gray light in a way that made it look almost cold clinical. Inside, soft piano music drifted through the lobby. A young teller led me to a glass-walled office where a woman in her 50s stood to greet me. She introduced herself as Claire Whitmore. Her handshake was firm, confident, and something in her calm demeanor made my shoulders loosen an inch. We sat. She pulled up the account on her computer. Her eyes scanned the screen, then narrowed slightly. "You're listed here as co-borrower," she said slowly, "while your parents are the deed holders." I nodded once. She clicked again. "Every payment for the past 4 years has come from your account. Mortgage, utilities, insurance? Everything." I felt a flush rise in my cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the weight of being seen, finally seen. "Have you been reimbursed for any of this?" she asked. "No." "Has there been any transfer of ownership? Any deed updates?" "No." Her brow furrowed. "And you do not live in the property?" "No." She leaned back in her chair. "This is extremely unusual." I swallowed. "I know. Why did you decide to stop the payments?" I opened the binder to the first page, my hand steady as I slid it toward her. "Because I was told I'm not part of their Christmas this year," I said quietly. "And because they've been telling people they paid for everything. They didn't." Claire skimmed the documents. With each page, she turned, her expression tightened. By the 4th page, she exhaled a low sound that was not quite disapproval, not quite empathy, something complicated, something professional, but human. "I need to be direct," she said gently. "You realize you legally own nothing here?" "Yes." "And you've been carrying the entire financial burden?" "Yes." She paused. "Do you want to continue paying?" The question was simple, but everything in my life had shifted around it. "No," I said. She slid a form toward me. "This is a co-borrower financial responsibility statement. It documents that you are unwilling to continue voluntary payments. It doesn't remove you from the loan today, but it protects you by formally stating your position." I read the short statement. It felt strange that something with so few words could reflect so many years of exhaustion. I signed it. Claire scanned it into the system, the soft whir of the scanner sounding almost ceremonial. When we stood, she walked with me toward the lobby. But just as we reached the reception area, the front doors swung open. My father stepped inside. He was wearing the same flannel shirt from the day I confronted him, his face flushed from the cold, or maybe from anger. He spoke loudly into his phone, unaware of the attention he was drawing. "I need to speak to a manager. This is unacceptable. Someone has sabotaged my mortgage behind my back." His voice echoed through the lobby. Claire froze. "Do you want to exit the side door?" she whispered. I straightened my shoulders. "No. I'm done avoiding him." My father ended his call and turned. His eyes landed on me. Shock flickered. Then fury. "What did you do?" he hissed. "The bank called me. They said you left a note on the account. They said you came in here." People in the lobby turned to look. I kept my voice level. "I told them the truth." His face darkened. "You made me look like a fool." "No," I said, soft but steady. "You did that on your own." He took a step forward, lowering his voice. "You are my daughter. Family doesn't turn on family." I met his eyes. "Family doesn't erase family." The words struck him like a physical blow. His mouth twisted, searching for something, anger, control, an argument he had rehearsed his whole life. But for once, the script didn't work. "This isn't over," he spat. I didn't flinch. "It is for me." He turned sharply and stormed toward a manager's office, still muttering, still puffed up, still performing for anyone who might be watching. I walked out of the bank into the crisp December air, my breath forming small clouds as I exhaled. My phone buzzed once in my hand, a new notification. From the reporter. The updated story goes live tonight. I stood there on the pavement, the sky heavy above me, the truth finally cutting through years of silence. And for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I drove back to Portland with the email from the reporter repeating in my mind like a soft but insistent drumbeat. The updated story goes live tonight. The words felt heavier than anything my father had thrown at me. They felt real, permanent, irreversible. By the time I reached my apartment garage, my heartbeat wasn't frantic anymore. It was steady, certain, almost eerily calm. I parked, turned off the engine, and sat in the dim stillness, letting the moment settle. This wasn't just a family dispute now. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a holiday argument. The truth was leaving their control, entering the world on its own terms. I finally stepped out of the car and rode the elevator up, feeling every inch of the distance between who I used to be and who I was becoming. Inside my apartment, the air felt warmer than the outside chill. I slipped off my coat and shoes, poured water into a glass, and opened my phone with steady hands. A notification waited at the top. The article was live. I tapped the link. The headline hit me like a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Daughter quietly paid for community Christmas home, not the grandparents. My chest tightened. I scrolled. The article was factual, firm, and painfully clear. It described the mortgage records, the utility payments, the lack of ownership under my name. It quoted a bank source confirming that every major expense had come from one account, mine. It stated directly that the parents celebrated for their generosity had not financially contributed. The reporter kept my identity anonymous, but the implications were unmistakable. My throat stung. Not with regret, not with shame, with relief. I sat back and reread parts of it, the truth settling deeper, spreading like warmth after a long freeze. My father's narrative, the one he had polished, the one he had weaponized, crumbled beneath the weight of simple facts. When I reached the end of the article, I clicked into the comments. The Redwood Bay community, the same people who had praised him so loudly, were suddenly asking new questions. I'm confused. Charles told us he funded everything. Why would they claim this if someone else paid? This doesn't match what he posted earlier. Is the daughter okay? Someone wrote, "Feels like we didn't get the whole story." Someone else added, "This is disappointing." My parents' original Facebook post had been edited to remove the caption. Then I noticed something else: they had disabled comments entirely. A small, cold piece of satisfaction settled in my chest. Not triumph, not cruelty, just accountability. My phone buzzed. Bree again. "You saw the article, the family chat is exploding." I typed, "What's happening?" She answered immediately. "Your dad is furious. He's yelling at everyone. Your mom is crying in the kitchen. Melanie is blaming you for exposing them. But the neighbors aren't buying their excuses. People are asking the hard questions." I exhaled slowly. It wasn't joy. I felt it was a release, like air finally escaping a sealed room. Another message from Bree. "I'm proud of you." That unexpectedly made my eyes sting. I placed the phone aside and walked toward the small drawer where I kept old letters, cards, mementos, the things I used to cling to when I needed a reminder that my parents loved me in their own way. I opened it slowly. Inside was a new envelope. Not from the past. From today. Slid under my door while I was at the bank. My father's handwriting. I opened it with a steady hand. The letter was short and sharp. "You have embarrassed this family in ways I cannot forgive. I worked my whole life to provide, and you threw it away for attention. I expect you to fix this. If you choose not to not call yourself part of this family anymore." He signed it with his full name. Not Dad, not love, not even sincerely. Just a name. A man insisting on control he no longer had. I refolded the letter and placed it back in the drawer, not to save it, not to treasure it, but to file it where it belonged. A piece of the past, not the present. My phone buzzed again. Another update from Bree. The neighbors are talking. Someone shared screenshots of the mortgage records. Your dad is retreating. He's not answering questions. People are noticing the inconsistency. Another message. You did the right thing. I walked into my living room, the soft glow of the lamp reflecting off the window. For the first time in years, the silence felt kind. Familiar. Mine. Then the phone lit up again. A call. From Dad. I watched it ring. 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 I didn't lift the phone. Didn't listen to the voicemail that came after. By the 10th missed call of the night, I placed the phone face down on the couch. Half an hour later, the number rose to 19. Then 23. Then 31. By the time the screen showed 39 missed calls, I knew the panic on his end had reached a level I had never seen before. But instead of fear tightening in my chest, a strange steadiness settled there. This wasn't an ending built on destruction. It was an ending built on truth. Mine. As the phone buzzed with yet another voicemail, I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street below. The lights of passing cars reflected on the wet pavement. A woman walked her dog past the entrance. Life went on steady, unshaken, unbothered. And somewhere in that quiet, I realized something with absolute clarity. The person I had been before all this, the girl who kept the peace, who absorbed the blame, who shouldered the burden, she was gone. And the woman standing here now, she wasn't afraid of the truth anymore. When I woke the next morning, the light filtering through my curtains was softer than usual, the kind that makes the world feel like it's holding its breath. My phone sat on the nightstand, face down, silent at last. After the barrage of calls the night before 39 in total, the stillness felt strange, almost delicate. For the first time in years, I let myself linger in bed, just breathing, just existing without bracing for the next demand or crisis. I finally stood, wrapped myself in a sweater, and moved through my apartment with slow, steady steps. Every small motion, boiling water, opening the blinds, tidying the blanket on the couch, felt like reclaiming pieces of my own life. I didn't rush. I didn't check my phone. I didn't wait for an explosion. Around 9, a soft knock came at my door. Not loud, not demanding. Just a quiet, hesitant tap. I opened it to find Jenna standing in the hallway, her hands shoved deep into the pockets of her puffer coat. The cold had colored her cheeks a soft pink. Her eyes held something I hardly recognized in my family gentleness. "Hey," she said, almost whispering. "Hey," she exhaled. "I read the article, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner, for not asking questions." I stepped aside. "Come in." She moved into the apartment slowly, as if afraid to touch anything. She glanced at the binder on the table, the stack of envelopes, the cold cup of tea from last night. Her expression tightened not with judgment, but with understanding. "I think deep down she said we all knew something wasn't right. But you were quiet about it, so we pretended it was fine." It wasn't. Her voice trembled on the last word. "We talked for a long time. She told me the family group chat had imploded once the article spread. She told me neighbors were calling out the inconsistencies, that some relatives had started defending me publicly. She told me my mother was overwhelmed, spiraling between guilt and fear. She told me my father was blaming everyone but himself. And then she said the words I didn't know I needed. You deserved better than what they gave you." My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to speak. Before she left, she paused at the doorway. "Whatever happens next, you're not alone. And you're not wrong. Don't forget that." After she was gone, the apartment felt warmer. Around noon, I made myself lunch and finally checked my phone. There were messages from coworkers, acquaintances, even distant relatives. Some were supportive, some were shocked. A few were passive-aggressive attempts to pry for details. I ignored those. Then I saw a message from someone unexpected. My mother. Just 3 words. I'm so sorry. It wasn't enough, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the wall she had held up for decades. A beginning, maybe. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed room to breathe first. I put my phone aside and walked out to the small nature trail behind my building. The air was crisp and the sky hung low with winter clouds. I followed the path as it wound toward the creek, the sound of thin water trickling over rocks mixing with the rustle of branches. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like my choices belonged to me. Not to obligation, not to guilt, not to the role I had been assigned in a family dynamic I never agreed to. Just me. When I returned home, I sat on the sofa and opened my laptop, not out of dread, but with a quiet sense of control. A new message from the reporter was waiting. She thanked me for trusting her. She said the story was receiving attention for all the right reasons. She hoped I felt some measure of justice. Justice. Not revenge, not retaliation, just truth. I leaned back into the cushions, letting the soft hum of the heater fill the space around me. Outside my window, the winter light faded into a muted gold. The day had been ordinary in the best possible way. Quiet, steady, honest. I thought about everything that had happened, the mortgage, the utilities, the Christmas exclusion, the catering bill, the manipulation, the silence, the years of unseen sacrifice. And I thought about the moment everything had shifted when my father told me I wasn't welcome, and something inside me finally said, enough. That single boundary had changed the entire trajectory of my life, and maybe that's the real lesson buried beneath all the chaos. Sometimes the quietest no is the loudest. Reclaiming of yourself. If you've ever lived through something like this, being overlooked, used, dismissed, underestimated, I hope you hear me when I say this. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Your voice matters. Your boundaries matter. Your truth matters. And you deserve a life built on respect, not fear. Thank you for listening to my story. If any part of it resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what integrity means to you. Or tell me the moment you finally chose yourself. And if you want more stories like this, raw, honest, real, consider liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps keep stories like mine alive.